The woman's hands moved with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a saint. 47 glass vials stood in neat rows before her, each containing a different shade of nature's pharmacy. Amber liquids caught the afternoon light streaming through the cabin window. Deep greens swirled with secrets older than the forest itself. Pale blues held the essence of flowers that only bloomed under moonlight. Elara lifted a dried root from the mortar, examining its texture between her fingertips. 15 years of study had taught her that wolfsbane harvested during the waning moon held 3 times the potency of its waxing counterpart. The books she had salvaged from her mother's collection never mentioned this. She had discovered it through trial and error, through countless nights of experimentation in this small cabin by the river. Her silver-white hair fell across her shoulders as she worked, a cascade of moonlight made solid. At 32 years old, she had earned every strand of that unusual coloring. Most wolves carried dark fur, brown or black or gray. But pain-bearers were different. The gift that flowed through their bloodline bleached them pale, as if the suffering they absorbed leached the color from their very cells. She crushed the root into fine powder, adding it to a mixture of calendula and meadowsweet. This particular remedy would ease joint pain in the elderly, a common complaint among the villagers who lived 3 miles downstream. They called her the Witch of the River, though they meant no insult by it. She had saved too many of their children, healed too many of their sick, for the name to carry anything but respect. The villagers did not know what she truly was. They believed her healing came from herbs and knowledge alone. And for 5 years, that had been enough. 5 years of building a life from nothing. 5 years of learning to heal without using the gift that had nearly killed her. Elara paused in her work, her pale blue eyes drifting to the window. The sky had grown dark with unnatural speed, clouds rolling in from the mountains like an invading army. She could smell the moisture in the air, feel the drop in pressure against her skin. A storm was coming. A bad one. She had prepared for this. 3 days ago, she had noticed the birds flying south in unusual patterns. 2 days ago, the river had begun to rise despite no rainfall. Yesterday, the fish had disappeared from their usual spots near the shallows. Nature always gave warnings to those who knew how to listen. Her supplies were stocked. Her shutters were reinforced. Her collection of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, safe from any flooding that might reach her door. She had learned self-reliance the hard way, through years of having no one to depend on but herself. The memory came unbidden, as it always did when storms approached. Her mother's face, pale and drawn, eyes that had once sparkled with warmth, now hollow with exhaustion. The Eastern Pack had taken everything from Miriam, had used her gift until there was nothing left to give. Elara remembered being 17, watching her mother waste away in the healer's quarters of Lord Varen's fortress. The Alpha of the Eastern Territory had demanded that Miriam heal his Beta, who had been poisoned by an enemy pack. When the Beta recovered, Varen demanded she heal his warriors wounded in a border skirmish, then his mate, who suffered from a mysterious illness, then his son, who had fallen from a horse. Each healing drained Miriam further. Each transfer of pain and injury into her own body pushed her closer to death. And when Miriam could no longer stand, when her heart had grown too weak to beat properly, they had turned to her daughter. Elara closed her eyes against the memory of those months, the endless stream of wounded and sick, all of them demanding that she take their suffering into herself. The agony of absorbing broken bones and infected wounds and diseases she could not name. The slow realization that she was dying, just as her mother had died, because the Eastern Pack saw pain-bearers as nothing more than tools to be used and discarded. She had escaped through cunning alone. No one had rescued her. No hero had burst through the doors to carry her to safety. Instead, she had studied the guard rotations during her brief moments of consciousness between healings. She had learned which guards drank heavily, which ones fell asleep at their posts, which ones could be bribed with promises she never intended to keep. On the night of her escape, she had laced the evening meal with valerian root and passion flower, a combination that induced deep sleep within minutes. While the guards slumbered, she had crawled from her bed, stolen a cloak and a bag of supplies, and fled into the forest. That had been 15 years ago. She had wandered for 10 of those years, moving from territory to territory, never staying long enough for anyone to discover what she was. Then she had found this cabin, abandoned and forgotten by the river's edge, and she had finally stopped running. A crack of thunder shook Elara from her memories. The storm had arrived faster than she expected, the wind already howling through the trees with vicious intent. She moved to secure her windows, checking each latch twice. The river would rise tonight, perhaps higher than she had ever seen it, but her cabin sat on elevated ground, chosen specifically for moments like this. She had just lit a candle against the growing darkness when she heard it, a sound that cut through the roar of the rushing water, through the pounding rain, through every instinct that told her to stay inside where it was safe. A child's voice, high and terrified, calling for help. Elara's blood turned to ice. She knew that sound. She had made that sound herself once, when the Eastern Pack had first taken her mother. The desperate cry of a young one who knew they were about to die. She did not hesitate. The herbs she had been sorting scattered across the floor as she ran for the door. The storm hit her like a physical blow the moment she stepped outside, rain driving against her face with needle-sharp intensity. But she could still hear the screaming, coming from the river, and she followed that sound with the single-minded focus of a predator tracking prey. The river had transformed into a monster. What was usually a gentle flow had become a churning mass of brown water and debris, carrying branches and logs and anything else unfortunate enough to fall into its grasp. The current moved with terrifying speed, fast enough to sweep away a full-grown wolf without effort. And there, in the middle of all that chaos, was a small white wolf pup struggling to keep his head above water. Elara's heart stopped. A pup, a child, drowning. For 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours, she assessed the situation with tactical precision born from years of survival. The current's direction, the speed of the water, the distance to the fallen tree that extended into the river 40 feet downstream, the angle of approach that would let her use the current rather than fight against it. Then she dove in. The cold hit her like a hammer to the chest, driving the air from her lungs in a single explosive gasp. The current immediately tried to drag her downstream, spinning her like a leaf in a hurricane. But Elara had lived by this river for 5 years. She knew its moods, its currents, its hidden dangers. She had swum these waters in every season, had mapped every eddy and undertow in her mind. She fought her way toward the pup, swimming at an angle that let the current carry her while still making progress across its width. Her muscles burned with effort, her lungs screamed for air, but she kept her eyes fixed on that flash of white fur, on that small body tumbling in the water. The pup was being carried downstream fast, his tiny legs paddling frantically against forces far beyond his control. She could see the moment his strength began to fail, the moment his head dipped below the surface and did not immediately return. No, 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 no. Elara dove under, eyes open despite the murky water that stung and blurred her vision. There, a flash of white. She grabbed the small body, her arms closing around it with desperate strength, and kicked hard toward the surface. They broke through together, Elara gasping for air while the pup coughed and choked in her arms. He was so small, no more than 4 years old in human terms, his white fur plastered to his body and making him look even tinier. His eyes, pale blue and ringed with silver, stared up at her with the glazed look of a creature in shock. The current was still trying to kill them, dragging them downstream toward rocks and rapids that would dash them to pieces. But Elara had planned for this. The fallen tree was coming up fast, a massive oak that had toppled during some previous storm and now extended 20 feet into the river. She kicked hard, angling toward the tree with everything she had left. Her muscles were screaming. Her lungs were burning. The pup was a dead weight in her arms, his small body limp with exhaustion and cold. But she refused to let go. The current tried to sweep them past the tree, but Elara caught a branch at the last second. The impact nearly tore the pup from her grasp, nearly ripped her arm from its socket, but she held on with the strength of pure desperation. For a long moment she just hung there, one hand gripping the branch, the other holding the pup against her chest, too exhausted to do more than breathe, too cold to feel anything but the faint flutter of the pup's heartbeat against her palm. He was still alive. She had reached him, in time. Elara pulled herself along the branch, hand over hand, until she could feel solid ground beneath her feet. Then she was crawling onto the bank, the pup still clutched against her body, both of them collapsing in the mud as the rain continued to pound down. She rolled onto her back, placing the pup on her chest where she could feel his breathing. Shallow, too shallow. His heartbeat was erratic, skipping beats in a pattern she recognized all too well. Hypothermia had set in. His small body could not maintain its core temperature, and without intervention, he would die within the hour. Elara's medical knowledge raced through possible solutions. She needed to get him warm, needed to get him dry. Her cabin was too far upstream, and she did not have the strength to carry him that distance. But there was a hunter's shelter nearby, just at the edge of the forest. It would have to do. She forced herself to stand, cradling the pup in her arms like the precious cargo he was. Every step was agony. Her legs felt like water. Her lungs still burned from the river. She was so cold she could barely feel her fingers gripping the pup's fur. But he was depending on her, so she kept moving. The shelter was small and rough, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it was dry. Elara kicked the door open and stumbled inside, collapsing onto the floor with the pup still in her arms. Her medical training took over, forcing her to assess even through her exhaustion. His breathing was shallow and rapid. His heartbeat was erratic. His skin beneath the fur felt ice cold to the touch, classic signs of severe hypothermia, complicated by the trauma of near drowning. She needed to start a fire, needed to get him warm, needed to work fast. But as she tried to stand, tried to find kindling and matches, she realized the truth with sickening clarity. There was no time. His heart was failing. She could hear it skipping more beats now, struggling to pump blood through a body that was shutting down. No fire would warm him fast enough. No medicine would work quickly enough. He was dying in her arms, and there was only one thing that could save him. Her gift, the power she had sworn never to use again. Elara looked down at the pup's face. His pale blue eyes had closed. His small body had stopped shivering, and she knew from her studies that this was the final stage. When a hypothermic victim stopped shivering, it meant their body had given up the fight. 5 years. She had gone 5 years without using her gift directly. 5 years of healing through herbs and poultices and carefully prepared medicines. 5 years of keeping herself safe from the agony that came with being a pain bearer. But this was a child, a pup who had done nothing wrong, who had simply been in the wrong place when the storm hit. A young one who would die in the next few minutes if she did not act. Elara took a shaky breath and placed her hands directly on the pup's small body. She closed her eyes and let her gift flow. It was like opening a floodgate. The pup's pain, his terror, his trauma, all of it poured into Elara in a torrent that made her gasp. She felt the water filling his lungs, the burning cold spreading through his limbs, the panic that had consumed him as he struggled in the river. She felt the moment he had gone under and known he was going to die. She felt his desperate thoughts of his father, his home, the warmth of his bed that he would never feel again. And beneath all of that, buried deep in his small psyche, she felt something else. Grief. Crushing, overwhelming grief for a mother who had died bringing him into the world. 2 years of silence, of refusing to speak, of holding all that pain inside because he did not have the words to express it. Elara took it all. She absorbed every drop of suffering, every ounce of trauma, every fragment of fear. She drew it out of him and into herself, letting it flood through her system like poison. The pup's breathing steadied. His heartbeat slowed to a normal rhythm. The hypothermia faded, replaced by healthy warmth that spread through his small body. He shifted in her arms, no longer shaking, and made a small sound of contentment. Elara held him for another moment, making sure he was truly healed. His lungs were clear, his heart was strong. Even the grief she had sensed felt lighter now, as if she had lifted some of the weight he had been carrying alone. Then the pain hit. It was like drowning all over again, like being trapped underwater with no way to surface, like having ice spread through her veins while fire burned in her lungs. Elara could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything but feel the overwhelming agony of what she had absorbed. She managed to lay the pup gently on the floor before she collapsed beside him. Her vision was going dark at the edges. Her heart was stuttering in her chest. She had taken too much, absorbed too deeply, and now she was paying the price. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the pup's small face, peaceful and healthy, his pale blue eyes fluttering open to look at her with confusion and concern. Worth it, she thought. He is alive. It was worth it. Then everything went black. She dreamed of her mother. Miriam stood in a field of white flowers, her silver hair flowing in an unfelt breeze, her pale blue eyes warm with love that death could not diminish. She reached out to touch Elara's face, her fingers trailing across her daughter's cheek with ghostly gentleness. "You saved him," Miriam said, her voice echoing as if from a great distance. "You saved the child." "I had to," Elara replied in the dream. "He would have died." "I know." Miriam smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I know you did what you had to do. You have always been stronger than you believe, my daughter, stronger than they ever gave you credit for." The dream shifted, and suddenly Elara was back in the Eastern Pax fortress. She could smell the blood and sickness, could hear the moans of the wounded, could feel the endless drain of power being pulled from her core. Lord Varen stood before her, his dark eyes cold with calculation. "You belong to us," he said. "Your gift belongs to us. You will heal my son, or you will watch everyone you love die." Elara woke with a gasp, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged animal. For a moment, she did not know where she was. The dream still clung to her, mixing with reality, until she could not separate past from present. Then she heard the voices, low, masculine voices speaking in urgent tones just outside the shelter's thin walls. At least a dozen of them, maybe more. And beneath the human words, she could hear something else, the soft padding of massive paws, the rustle of fur against fur, the deep, rumbling growls of wolves ready for battle. Elara tried to sit up, but her body refused to cooperate. The after-effects of her healing still gripped her, leaving her weak and disoriented. She managed to prop herself on one elbow, her vision swimming with the effort. The pup was no longer beside her. Panic shot through her system, giving her strength she should not have had. She pushed herself upright, looking frantically around the small shelter for the child she had saved. He was sitting by the door, his small white form outlined against the gray light of dawn that seeped through the cracks in the wood. He was looking at something outside, his tiny tail wagging slowly. And then he spoke. "Do not hurt my new mama." The words were soft, barely more than a whisper, but they carried clearly in the silence that followed. Elara's breath caught in her throat. The pup had spoken. According to the grief she had absorbed from him, he had not spoken a word in 2 years, not since his mother died. The door exploded inward. 20 wolves poured into the shelter, massive creatures with silver and gray fur, and eyes that glowed with barely contained aggression. They spread out in a perfect tactical formation, blocking every exit, every window, every possible escape route. Their movements spoke of military precision, of training that went far beyond normal pack discipline. These were not ordinary wolves. These were elite warriors, the kind that guarded royalty. The pup did not seem afraid. He stood his ground in front of Elara, his small body positioned between her and the invading force. His tail had stopped wagging, his posture shifting from relaxed to protective. "She saved me," the pup said, his voice growing stronger. "She pulled me from the river. You will not hurt her." One of the wolves, larger than the others with pure silver fur and ice-blue eyes, pushed to the front of the formation. He studied the scene with an intensity that made Elara's skin prickle. His gaze moved from the pup to her, taking in her soaked and muddy clothes, her silver-white hair, her pale blue eyes that marked her as something other than ordinary. Then he shifted. The transformation happened in the space between heartbeats, wolf form flowing into human with a grace that spoke of centuries of practice. The man who stood before her was tall and broad-shouldered, his silver hair cut short in a military style that emphasized the sharp angles of his face. Dark circles shadowed his ice-blue eyes. A scar ran from his left temple to his jawline, the pale line of old violence. Another scar crossed his throat, a wound that should have been fatal. He moved with the careful precision of someone compensating for chronic pain. His left shoulder sat slightly lower than his right, the result of an injury that had never fully healed. He was handsome in a weathered way, his face carrying the weight of years and battles and losses that had left their mark. But it was his eyes that captured Elara's attention, those ice-blue eyes that matched the pup's exactly. Those eyes that widened with shock the moment they met hers. Something snapped into place between them. Elara felt it like a physical blow, a connection forming at a level deeper than flesh or bone. The mate bond, the legendary tie that linked two souls destined to be together, exploded into being with a force that stole her breath. No, this could not be happening. She saw the same realization dawn in his eyes, saw his body go rigid with the impact of the bond settling into place. He took an involuntary step toward her, his hand reaching out as if to touch her, to confirm that she was real. Then he stopped himself. The effort it took was visible in the tension of his muscles, the clenching of his jaw, the way his hand curled into a fist at his side. He was fighting the mate bond's pull, forcing himself to think rather than simply act. Elara understood in that moment that this was not an ordinary alpha. This was a man who had learned through bitter experience that the mate bond was not a guarantee of anything. A man who knew that connection did not equal trust, that desire did not equal love, that fate's choice was not always the right one. "Father!" The pup's voice broke the tension. He trotted over to the man, shifting mid-stride into a small boy with silver-white hair and pale blue eyes. He was 4 years old, perhaps 5 at most, and he was looking up at his father with an expression of fierce protectiveness. "She saved me," the boy said again. "I fell in the river, and she pulled me out. She made the cold go away. She made the bad memories go away. You cannot hurt her." The man knelt, bringing himself to eye level with his son. His large hands came up to cup the boy's face, tilting it this way and that, checking for injuries that were not there. "You are speaking." The words came out rough, thick with emotion the man was clearly trying to control. "Asher, you are speaking again. Asher." The pup's name was Asher. Elara filed the information away, still too weak to do more than observe. "She fixed me," Asher said simply. "I was broken inside and she fixed me. She is going to be my new mama." The man closed his eyes. His shoulders shook with something that might have been laughter or might have been a sob. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. He turned to look at Elara, and this time there was no shock in his gaze, only gratitude so profound it made her chest ache. "I am Kael," he said, "Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and you have saved my son, Alpha King." The words hit Elara like a second blow from the river's current. She had saved the son of the Alpha King. She had formed a mate bond with the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in all the territories, the leader of 10,000 pack members, the man who commanded armies and controlled a domain that stretched from the northern mountains to the eastern forests. And he was her destined mate. The implications crashed over her in waves. An Alpha King meant constant danger, constant battles, constant injuries that would trigger her compulsion to heal. She would spend her life absorbing his pain, taking his wounds into herself, dying slowly just as her mother had died. She had escaped one prison only to stumble into another. "I need to leave," Elara said, forcing herself to her feet despite the weakness that still gripped her limbs. Her voice came out stronger than she expected, steadied by years of hiding her fear. "Thank you for your gratitude, but I must return to my home." She tried to move toward the door, but her legs buckled beneath her. She would have fallen if Kael had not caught her, his hands gripping her arms with careful strength. The moment their skin touched, the mate bond flared between them. Warmth flooded through Elara's body, chasing away the last of the cold. Kael sucked in a sharp breath, his grip tightening fractionally before he forced himself to let go. "You can barely stand," Kael said, his voice carefully neutral. You need rest, medical attention. Food? I have survived worse. Elara stepped back, putting distance between them that the mate bond immediately protested. I am a healer. I know my limits. You are a pain bearer. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. How had he known? She had been so careful to hide what she was, to let everyone believe she was merely a skilled herbalist. The silver-white hair could be explained away as a family trait. The pale blue eyes were unusual, but not unheard of. She had built her entire life around concealing the truth. I watched you heal my son, Kael said quietly. I have seen many healers work. None of them could draw hypothermia from a body. None of them could erase trauma so completely that a child who has not spoken in 2 years suddenly finds his voice. He took a step toward her, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her want to run. I've also seen what happens to pain bearers when they use their gift. The woman who healed my mother when I was a boy. She absorbed a fever that should have been fatal, and then she spent 3 days in agony while her own body fought the illness she had taken. Kael gestured at Elara's pale face, at the trembling in her limbs that she could not control. You absorbed my son's hypothermia, his trauma, his pain, and now you are suffering the consequences. I will recover, Elara said, though she was not entirely certain that was true. The healing had been deeper than any she had attempted in years. The after-effects might linger for days. I do not doubt your strength. Kael's voice softened. But you do not have to recover alone. Come with me to my territory. Let my healers tend to you. Let my pack repay the debt we owe you. Elara shook her head. You do not understand. Then explain it to me. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. He was not demanding answers. He was not threatening consequences. He was simply asking, with a patience that seemed at odds with his reputation as a warrior king. Asher had moved to stand beside his father, his small hand gripping Kael's larger one. The boy's pale blue eyes watched Elara with concern that went beyond his years. Please come with us, Asher said. I do not want you to be alone. The innocent plea cracked something in Elara's carefully constructed walls. She had been alone for so long, 15 years of solitude, of hiding, of surviving on nothing but her own determination. And here was a child who had been drowning an hour ago, now standing before her with all the trust in the world shining in his eyes. She could not tell them the truth, could not explain that her mate bond with Kael was a death sentence, that every time he was injured, she would be compelled to heal him, that every healing would drain her further until there was nothing left. But she could not refuse Asher's plea entirely. 3 days, Elara said finally. I will come with you for 3 days, long enough to ensure Asher has no lingering effects from his ordeal. Then I returned to my home. Something flickered in Kael's eyes, disappointment perhaps, or simply the recognition that she was not ready to trust him. But he nodded. 3 days, he agreed. And during that time, you will be treated as an honored guest. No one will force you to do anything you do not wish to do, including use my gift. Kael's expression remained steady. Including use your gift. You have given us more than we had any right to ask. We will not demand more. The sincerity in his voice made Elara want to believe him, but she had heard similar promises before. The Eastern Pack had also promised to treat her with respect, to value her gift rather than exploit it. And look how that had ended. She would stay for 3 days. She would make sure Asher was truly healed. And then she would disappear back into the solitude that kept her safe. The journey to the Northern Territory took most of the day. Kael insisted that Elara ride on the back of one of his wolves rather than walk, and she was too exhausted to argue. The wolf assigned to carry her was a massive silver creature named Caden, who moved with silent efficiency through the forest. Kael himself ran alongside them in his wolf form, a pure white beast larger than any of his guards. His ice-blue eyes kept drifting back to check on Elara, and each time they met her gaze, the mate bond pulsed between them with insistent warmth. Asher refused to leave her side. He rode on Caden's back as well, pressed against Elara's legs in his wolf pup form, his small body radiating heat that helped chase away the last of her chills. By the time the territory came into view, word of their arrival had spread. Wolves lined the paths leading to the central settlement, all of them staring at the silver-haired woman their alpha king carried into his domain. Whispers followed in their wake. Speculation, curiosity, and from some, suspicion. Elara ignored it all. She had experience with being an outsider, with being the subject of gossip and mistrust. It no longer bothered her the way it once had. The healing center was a large stone building near the heart of the settlement. Kale led her inside personally, past curious healers and murmuring assistants, to a private room in the back. The room was comfortable rather than luxurious. A bed with clean linens, a fireplace already burning with cheerful warmth. A window overlooking a garden filled with medicinal plants that Elara recognized instantly. "Marin will tend to you," Kale said, gesturing to an older woman who had followed them into the room. The woman was tall and lean, with silver hair pulled back in a practical braid and gray eyes that studied Elara with sharp intelligence. But there was something else in that gaze. Recognition, understanding, as if she knew exactly what Elara was without being told. "Leave us," Marin said to Kale. Her voice was firm despite being addressed to the Alpha King. "She needs rest, not an audience." Kale hesitated. The mate bond was pulling at him, Elara could see, demanding that he stay close to protect her. But he mastered the impulse with visible effort. "I will return this evening," he said to Elara, "to check on your progress. That is not necessary." Nevertheless, he held her gaze for a long moment. "I find that I cannot stay away." He left before she could respond, Asher trailing reluctantly behind him with many backward glances at Elara. When the door closed, Marin let out a long breath. "So." She pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. "Another pain-bearer. I thought I was the last." Elara's eyes widened. "You are... was." Marin's smile was tinged with sadness. "I lost my gift 40 years ago, after a healing that nearly killed me. Now I am simply a healer who understands herbs and medicines." She reached out to touch Elara's hand, and Elara felt nothing but the warmth of another person's skin. No compulsion to heal, no surge of power. Marin's gift was truly gone. "You pushed too far," Elara said. She knew the stories. Pain-bearers who overextended themselves could burn out their gift entirely, leaving them ordinary. "I had no choice at the time." Marin's expression grew distant with memory. "But that is not why I wanted to speak with you alone." She leaned forward, her gray eyes intense. "You felt it, did you not? The mate bond with Kale." Elara looked away. "I do not wish to discuss it. I understand." Marin's voice was gentle. "You believe the bond is a death sentence, that being mated to an Alpha King means endless healing, endless pain, endless sacrifice, until you have nothing left. That is exactly what it means." "Perhaps." Marin paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Or perhaps there is more to the mate bond than you know." Elara turned back to her, curiosity warring with caution. "The ancient texts speak of pain-bearers who found their true mates," Marin continued, "healers whose bonds provided something unprecedented. Protection. A filtering of the gift, so that healing could occur without the backlash of absorbed suffering. That is a legend." Elara had read those texts herself during her years of study, a story told to give pain-bearers hope. Perhaps. Marin stood, moving to the window to look out at the garden. Or perhaps it is a truth that has simply never been tested. True mates are rare. Pain-bearers are even rarer. The odds of a pain-bearer finding their true mate are astronomical. She turned back to face Elara. "But you have found yours. You have formed a mate bond with the Alpha King. And that means we have an opportunity to discover whether the legends are truth or fiction." Elara was silent for a long moment. The idea was tempting. A way to heal without suffering. A chance at a life she had never dared imagine. But she had learned long ago not to trust in hope. "Even if the legends are true," she said finally, "they require the mate bond to be complete. Both parties must accept it fully, and I do not know if I can do that. Because you do not trust him. Because I do not trust anyone." Marin nodded slowly. That is wise. Kael is a good man, but you have no reason to believe my word on that. You must see for yourself. Her eyes met Elara's with quiet intensity. That is why you should stay longer than 3 days. Give yourself time to observe, time to judge, time to decide whether the risk is worth taking. Before Elara could respond, a commotion erupted outside the healing center. Raised voices, running footsteps, the sharp crack of wood breaking. Marin moved to the window, her expression shifting from thoughtful to alarmed. "There is smoke," she said, "coming from the eastern forest, near the river." Elara's heart clenched. "Near my cabin." She pushed herself out of bed despite her weakness, crossing to stand beside Marin at the window. In the distance, beyond the trees that marked the edge of the territory, a column of black smoke rose against the evening sky. Kael burst into the room, his face grim. "My scouts found your cabin," he said to Elara. "Or what remains of it." Elara felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean?" "It has been burned to the ground." Kael's voice was carefully controlled, but she could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. And there was a message, written in blood on the stones that survived the fire. She knew, even before he spoke the words, she knew. "Pain-bearer belongs to the Eastern Pack. You cannot run." Kael moved to stand before her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, the pulse of the mate bond demanding connection. "Lord Varen," he said, "Alpha of the Eastern Territory. He has been searching for a pain-bearer for years. His son is dying from something called the shadow sickness, and only a pain-bearer can cure it." Elara's legs gave out. Kael caught her, easing her down onto the bed with surprising gentleness. His hands lingered on her arms, and even through her shock, she could feel the mate bond singing at the contact. "You have been hiding from him," Kael said, "all this time, living alone by the river. That is why you isolated yourself." Elara could not speak. Her cabin, her home, the place she had spent 5 years building, filling with books and herbs and everything that made her feel safe. Gone. Destroyed by the same pack that had killed her mother. She had thought she was free. She had thought she had escaped. But Varen had never stopped looking. And now he had found her. "There is more," Kael said, his voice dropping. "My scouts found tracks near the burned cabin. At least 30 wolves. They were searching for something." "For me," Elara whispered. "They were searching for me. They know you are not there, which means they will be looking for you elsewhere." Kael's hands tightened on her arms, and this territory is the most logical place to search. The implications settled over Elara like a shroud. She had brought danger to these people. By saving Asher, by coming here, she had led Varen straight to the Northern Territory. "I should leave." She tried to stand, but Kael held her in place. "If I go, if I turn myself over to them—" "No!" The word cracked through the room like thunder. Kael's eyes blazed with a fury that made the mate bond pulse between them. "You saved my son. You gave him back his voice, his joy, his will to live. I will not repay that by handing you over to the wolves who want to use you until you die. You do not understand what Varen will do." Elara's voice shook despite her efforts to control it. "He burned my cabin. He will burn your territory. He will—" "Let him try." Kael stood, and in that moment, he was every inch the Alpha King. Power radiated from him, the authority of a man who had led his pack through wars and disasters and emerged stronger each time. "Varen has 50 wolves at best. I command 200 of the finest warriors in all the territories. If he wants a war, I will give him one." Elara stared at him. She had expected demands. Expected him to question whether she was worth the trouble, to calculate the cost of protecting her against the benefit of avoiding conflict. Instead, he was preparing to go to war for her, a woman he had known for less than a day. Why? The question came out barely above a whisper. Kael looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but intense. "Because you are my mate. Because my son has claimed you as his mother, because no one in my territory will be threatened by outside forces as long as I draw breath." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Rest," he said. "Recover your strength. You are safe here. I give you my word." Then he was gone, already shouting orders to his guards, already preparing for the conflict to come. Elara sat alone in the quiet room, the mate bond thrumming in her chest, the smoke from her destroyed home still visible through the window. She had spent 15 years running, 15 years hiding, 15 years believing that safety could only be found in solitude. But solitude had failed her. Varen had found her anyway, and now, for the first time since her mother died, someone was offering to fight for her, not because she had asked, not because she had demanded, simply because he believed she deserved to be protected. Elara did not know if she could trust Kale, did not know if the legends about mate bonds protecting pain-bearers were true, did not know if she was strong enough to open herself to the possibility of connection after so many years alone. But as she watched the smoke rise against the darkening sky, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She could not run anymore. Her cabin was gone, her hiding place was destroyed, and Varen would not stop hunting her until she was captured or dead. For better or worse, her fate was now tied to the Northern Territory, to the Alpha King who had caught her when she fell, to the small boy who had claimed her as his mama. 3 days, she had promised. Looking at the smoke from her burned life, Elara wondered if 3 days would be enough to decide whether to embrace this new possibility or flee into an uncertain future. The mate bond pulsed in her chest, warm and insistent, and somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the caution and the years of protective walls, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place worth staying for. The council chamber fell silent the moment Elara entered. 12 wolves sat around a massive oak table, their eyes tracking her movement with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Torches lined the stone walls, casting flickering shadows across faces hardened by years of political maneuvering and territorial disputes. Kael stood at the head of the table, his silver hair catching the firelight. He had summoned her here 3 days after the burning of her cabin, 3 days after she had agreed to stay temporarily in the Northern Territory. 3 days of recovery, of watching from the healing center windows as the pack went about its daily business, of feeling the mate bond pulse insistently every time Kael came to check on her. Now he wanted her to face his council, to explain herself, to justify her presence in their territory. Elara held her head high as she walked to the empty chair beside Merrin. She had survived the Eastern Pack's torture. She had survived 15 years of solitude. She would survive a room full of suspicious politicians. This is her. The voice belonged to a man seated directly across from her, his gray hair cropped close to his skull and his dark eyes burning with barely concealed contempt. This is the unknown female our Alpha King wishes to protect at the cost of our alliance with the Southern Pack. Counselor Draven. Elara had learned his name from Merrin during the past 3 days. 60 years old, formerly a general in the Pack's military before age forced him into politics. He had opposed Kael's leadership since the day Kael took the throne, always pushing for more aggressive expansion, always questioning every decision. "She is not unknown," Kael said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Her name is Elara. She is a healer of extraordinary skill. And she saved my son's life. She is also a pain-bearer." Draven leaned forward, his gnarled hands flat on the table. A creature of legend, some would say. Others would call her kind a curse. Every pack that has harbored a pain-bearer has suffered for it. "Every pack that has exploited a pain-bearer has suffered for it," Merrin interjected. Her gray eyes met Draven's without flinching. "The distinction matters." "Does it?" Draven's lip curled. "The Eastern Pack is marching toward our borders because of her. Lord Varen has made it clear he will have her, by negotiation or by force. And what do we gain by protecting her? A healer we do not need and a political crisis we cannot afford." Elara felt the words like physical blows, but she kept her expression neutral. She had expected this, had prepared for it during the long hours in the healing center. "Counselor Draven raises valid concerns," she said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. I did not ask for the Alpha King's protection. I did not seek to bring conflict to your territory, and I have no intention of remaining longer than necessary." Kale's eyes snapped to her, the mate bond flaring between them with something that felt like protest. "What do you mean?" His voice was carefully controlled, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I mean that I will not be the reason your pack goes to war." Elara met his gaze directly. "When the situation with Varen is resolved, I will leave. I will find another place to hide, another territory where my presence will not cause such disruption." The council chamber buzzed with murmured reactions. Some voices sounded approving, others seemed surprised. Draven's expression shifted from hostility to calculation, as if he were reassessing her. Kale was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "We will discuss this matter further in private. For now, the council is adjourned." The dismissal was abrupt, clearly not what the councilors had expected, but no one dared argue with their Alpha King. Chairs scraped against stone as the 12 wolves filed out, Draven lingering longest with a final measuring look at Elara before departing. When the door closed, leaving only Kale, Elara, and Merrin, the Alpha King turned to face her fully. "You would leave." It was not a question. His ice-blue eyes searched her face, looking for something she was not sure she could give him. "I would do what is necessary to protect your pack." Elara stood, her hands clasped before her to hide their trembling. "You have 10,000 wolves depending on you. An alliance with the southern pack that could crumble if you refuse to honor your marriage arrangement. An enemy at your borders who will not stop until he has what he wants. And what Varen wants is you. What Varen wants is a tool." Alara's voice hardened. "A pain-bearer to heal his dying son. I am merely the most convenient option. If I disappear, he will eventually find another. There are no others." Merrin's quiet words cut through the tension. "My gift burned out decades ago. The pain-bearer who served the Southern Pack died in childbirth 20 years past. The Western Territories have not seen one in living memory." She moved to stand beside Elara, her gray eyes soft with understanding. "You are the last child, the only pain-bearer left in all the territories. That is why Varen is so desperate. That is why he will never stop hunting you." The weight of those words settled over Elara like a shroud. She had known she was rare, had known that pain-bearers were dying out, their bloodlines thinning with each generation. But she had never considered that she might be the last. "All the more reason for me to leave," she said finally. "If I am truly the last, then my capture would give Varen unprecedented power. He could demand anything from the other packs in exchange for my services. I will not let myself become a weapon in his hands. And if you stay?" Kael took a step toward her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "If you remain under my protection, as my mate?" The word hung in the air between them. Mate. The bond that the moon goddess herself had forged, connecting their souls in ways that transcended simple attraction. Elara shook her head slowly. "The mate bond is not a marriage, Alpha King. It is a connection, yes, a pull. But I have learned through bitter experience that connections can be exploited, that pulls can become chains. I am not Varen. No." She met his eyes, and for a moment she let him see the fear beneath her careful composure. "But how can I be certain of that? How can I trust that the protection you offer will not become another form of captivity?" Kael was silent. The question was fair, and they both knew it. He could make all the promises in the world, but words were cheap. Only actions would prove his intentions. "Then I will show you." His voice was quiet but intense. "Stay long enough to observe how I lead this pack. Watch how I treat those under my protection. See for yourself whether I am the kind of man who would cage what he claims to love." The word love sent a jolt through the mate bond. Elara caught her breath, her carefully constructed walls trembling. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted outside the council chamber. Running footsteps, raised voices, the sharp bark of orders being given. The door burst open, and Theron limped through. The beta's silver hair was disheveled, his artificial leg clicking against the stone floor as he moved with urgent speed. "We have a problem," he said, his gray eyes grim. "Children in the eastern settlement are falling ill. 12 so far, with more showing symptoms every hour. Marin straightened immediately. What kind of illness? High fever? Convulsions? Difficulty breathing? Theron's expression darkened. Our healers cannot identify it. They have never seen anything like it. Elara felt something shift inside her. The healer's instinct, dormant during her years of isolation, surging back to life. "Take me to them," she said. Theron's eyes flicked to Kale, seeking permission. The Alpha King nodded once. "Whatever she needs, give it to her." His gaze met Elara's. "Show them what you can do." The eastern settlement was an hour's run from the main territory, a cluster of wooden buildings nestled in a valley where the river curved through ancient forest. By the time Elara arrived, riding once again on Caden's back, the number of sick children had grown to 15. They had been gathered in the settlement's small healing house, a building that smelled of herbs and fear. Parents huddled in corners, their faces drawn with worry. Young healers moved between the beds, applying cool cloths and administering remedies that clearly were not working. Elara took in the scene with eyes trained by decades of study. The children ranged in age from 3 to 10, their small bodies racked with fever and tremors. Their breathing was labored, their skin flushed and hot to the touch. But it was the pattern of their symptoms that caught her attention. "The convulsions come in waves," she observed, moving to the nearest bed where a young girl of perhaps 5 years lay shaking. "Every few minutes, yes?" The mother nodded frantically. "Yes, exactly. She seizes for 30 seconds, then calms, then seizes again." Elara placed her hand on the girl's forehead, feeling the unnatural heat beneath her palm. The instinct to use her gift surged within her, the pain-bearer's compulsion to absorb the suffering she sensed. But she forced it down. She would not need her gift for this. "Bring me water from the source these children drink from," she commanded, "and show me what herbs you have available." The next 2 hours were a blur of activity. Elara examined each child, cataloging their symptoms with methodical precision. She questioned the parents about what the children had eaten, where they had played, what sources of water they had drunk from. The pattern became clear quickly. All 15 children had drawn water from the same well on the eastern edge of the settlement. All had begun showing symptoms within hours of each other. The illness was not spreading from person to person. It had a single, specific source. When a young healer brought her a bucket of well water, Elara knew immediately that her suspicion was correct. The water had been poisoned. The color was wrong, carrying a faint greenish tinge that would be invisible to untrained eyes. The smell was wrong, a barely perceptible bitterness beneath the clean scent of spring water. And when she dipped a strip of cloth into the bucket and watched it slowly discolor, she knew exactly what she was dealing with. "Shadow moss extract," she said grimly. "Combined with wolfsbane root and something else. Something I need to identify." Marin had arrived an hour earlier, and now she stood beside Elara with an expression of growing horror. "Shadow moss is nearly impossible to obtain," the older woman said. "It grows only in the deepest caves of the eastern mountains." The eastern mountains. Elara's voice was flat. Lord Varen's territory. The implications hung in the air. This was not a natural illness. This was an attack, carefully orchestrated and precisely executed. But why target children? Marin's voice shook with anger. What kind of monster poisons innocent pups? The kind who wants to send a message. Elara's mind was already racing through possibilities, or the kind who wants to force my hand. She turned to the young healers who had gathered around her, their faces pale with fear and confusion. "Listen carefully," she said, her voice taking on the commanding tone of a teacher addressing students. "I'm going to tell you how to save these children. You will follow my instructions exactly. There is no room for error." For the next 3 hours, Elara worked with a focus that bordered on obsession. She identified the third component of the poison, a rare fungus that grew only in the presence of dark magic. She formulated a counter-agent from 3 herbs that grew in the valley, their properties combining in ways that no ordinary healer would have known. She taught the young healers how to prepare the remedy, walking them through each step with patience she did not feel. She showed them the precise measurements, the exact timing, the subtle signs that would indicate whether the treatment was working. And one by one, The children began to recover. The fevers broke, the convulsions stopped, color returned to pale cheeks, and labored breathing eased into normal rhythm. By nightfall, all 15 children were sleeping peacefully, their parents weeping with relief. Elara stood outside the healing house, her body exhausted, but her mind still churning. She had not used her gift, had not absorbed a single drop of suffering. She had saved those children through knowledge alone, through the skills she had spent 15 years developing in solitude. But the victory felt hollow. Someone had poisoned those children to draw her out, to force her to reveal her presence, her skills, her value, and that someone had access to ingredients that could only come from the Eastern Territory. "You saved them." Kael's voice came from behind her. She had not heard him approach, but she was not surprised by his presence. The mate bond had told her he was near. "I bought them time," she said without turning. "The poison was designed to kill slowly. Whoever created it wanted the children to suffer for days before dying. My remedy reversed the immediate symptoms, but I do not know if there will be lasting damage." She felt Kael move to stand beside her, his presence warm against the cool night air. 15 children are alive because of you," he said quietly. 15 families still have their pups. Whatever happens next, that matters. Elara finally turned to look at him. In the moonlight, his scars stood out in sharp relief, pale lines against weathered skin. His ice-blue eyes held an emotion she could not quite identify. "The poison came from the Eastern Territory," she said, "ingredients that only Varen's pack would have access to." "I know." Kael's expression hardened. "My scouts confirmed it an hour ago. They also found something else." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small object, holding it out for her to see. It was a pendant, a silver chain holding a dark stone that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. "This was found near the well," Kael continued, "hidden in the roots of a nearby tree. The scouts recognized it immediately." Elara studied the pendant without touching it. The stone was familiar, though she could not immediately place it. "It belongs to Counselor Draven," Kael said. His voice was cold with barely contained rage. "Given to him by Lord Varen himself 20 years ago during a diplomatic mission to the Eastern Territory. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Draven, who had argued so vehemently against protecting her. Draven, who had access to the settlement's water supply. Draven, who had connections to Varen stretching back decades. He poisoned the children," Elara whispered. "One of your own counselors. To make a point." Kael's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "To show us that Varen's reach extends even into the heart of my territory, and perhaps to test your abilities, to confirm that you truly are a pain-bearer, or to force me to leave." Elara's voice was bitter. "If the pack believes I bring only suffering, they will demand my departure." Draven would have his way without ever dirtying his hands directly. Kael was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. "I have called for Draven's arrest," he said. "He will face justice before the entire pack. But this changes nothing about the larger threat. Varen is coming, and now we know he has allies within our own walls." "How many?" Elara asked. "Unknown." Kael's jaw tightened. "Draven may be the only traitor, or he may be one of many. Until we identify them all, no one in the council can be fully trusted, including me." The words hung between them. Kael turned to face her fully, his eyes searching her face. "No," he said simply, "not including you. I am an unknown." She echoed Draven's words from the council meeting. "A stranger who appeared from nowhere, bringing enemies to your door. You have no reason to trust me. I have every reason." Kael took a step closer, and the mate bond pulsed between them with almost painful intensity. "You saved my son. You healed these children. You have had countless opportunities to flee, to save yourself, and instead, you stayed to help people you owe nothing to." His hand came up, hovering near her face without quite touching. "I know the difference between a healer and a weapon, Elara. I have seen both, and you are not what Varen and Draven tried to make you." Elara felt tears prick at her eyes, an emotion she had not allowed herself in years. She blinked them back, refusing to show weakness. "You barely know me," she said. Then let me know you better. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Stay. Not because of the mate bond, not because you have nowhere else to go. Stay because I am asking you to. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. A scout burst from the tree line, his wolf form shifting to human mid-stride. Alpha King! The young man's voice was tight with urgency. Riders approaching from the east, 50 wolves carrying the banner of Lord Varen. They fly a flag of truce. Kael's expression shifted instantly from tender to tactical. His body language changed, shoulders squaring and spine straightening into the posture of a commander preparing for battle. Formation, he ordered. Full guard on the perimeter. No one enters the territory without my express permission. He turned to Elara, his eyes hard. Stay here, he said. Do not let them see you until I know what Varen wants. But Elara shook her head. No, she said firmly. If Varen has come to negotiate, he has come for me. I will not hide like a frightened pup while you face him alone. Something flickered in Kael's eyes. Respect, perhaps, or admiration. Very well, he said after a moment, but you stay behind me, and if I give the order to run, you run. Agreed? Elara nodded once, agreed. The Eastern Pact's delegation arrived at the border an hour before dawn. 50 wolves in human form, armed and armored, but with weapons sheathed, following a single figure who rode at their head. Lord Varen was smaller than Elara had expected. In her memories, he loomed as a giant, a monster who had torn her mother from her arms and used her until there was nothing left. But the man who dismounted before Kael's defensive line was barely taller than average, with gray streaking his dark hair and deep lines carved into his weathered face. His eyes were exactly as she remembered, dark and calculating and utterly devoid of mercy. Alpha King Kael. Varen's voice was smooth, cultured, the voice of a politician rather than a warrior. I come in peace, seeking to resolve a matter that concerns us both. You poisoned children in my territory. Kael's response was flat and cold. You have a strange definition of peace. Varen's expression flickered, something like surprise crossing his features, before disappearing behind a mask of calm. I assure you, I gave no orders to harm any children. If such an attack occurred, it was without my knowledge or consent. One of your agents carried it out. The pendant found at the scene bears the mark of Eastern Territory craftsmanship. The poison contained ingredients found only in your mountains. Varen was silent for a moment, his dark eyes calculating. It seems we have a common enemy then, he said finally. Someone who wishes conflict between our territories. Someone who would use innocent children as pawns in their schemes. He stepped forward, hands spread in a gesture of openness. I did not come here for war, Alpha King. I came to make an offer, an exchange that would benefit us both. Speak then. Kael's voice remained cold, but choose your words carefully. Varen's gaze shifted, scanning the line of northern warriors until it landed on Elara. The recognition in his eyes was immediate and hungry. There she is, he breathed, the daughter of Miriam, the last pain-bearer in all the territories. He turned back to Kael, his expression shifting to something almost pleading. My son is dying, he said. Soren has been consumed by what the ancient texts call the shadow sickness, a curse that eats him from within, stealing his strength and his sanity piece by piece. No healer can touch it. No medicine can slow its progress. He paused, and for a moment, Elara saw genuine anguish beneath the political mask. Only a pain-bearer can cure the shadow sickness, Varen continued, by absorbing the darkness itself, drawing it out of the victim's body and into their own, and in the process, destroying themselves. Elara's voice cut through the night air, startling both alphas. The shadow sickness is not a disease. It is a curse placed upon those who torture pain-bearers. The darkness that infects your son is nothing less than the accumulated suffering of every healer he ever forced to sacrifice themselves for his benefit. She stepped forward, past Kael's protective stance, until she stood facing Varen directly. I know what your son did to my mother, she continued, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. I know he was the one who held her down while she screamed, who demanded that she heal him again and again until her heart gave out. The shadow sickness did not come from nowhere, Lord Varen. It is justice, delivered by the moon goddess herself. Varen's face went pale. For a long moment he simply stared at her, and Elara saw the truth in his eyes. He had known, had always known what his son had done. "That was 15 years ago," he said finally. "Soren was young, foolish. He has changed." "Has he?" Elara's voice was ice. "Has he spent the last 15 years seeking out the families of the pain-bearers he destroyed? Has he devoted himself to atoning for the lives he took?" Silence was her answer. "I thought not." She turned to look at Kael. "Lord Varen asks me to sacrifice my life to save the man who murdered my mother. I believe my answer is clear." Kael's expression was unreadable, but she could feel the mate bond pulsing between them, warm with something that felt like pride. "You have your answer, Varen," the Alpha King said. "The pain-bearer has spoken for herself. She is not a tool to be demanded or negotiated. She is a person with the right to refuse." Varen's mask of civility cracked, revealing the ruthlessness beneath. "You would condemn my son to death," he snarled at Elara, "for crimes committed when he was barely more than a boy." "I would let the moon goddess's justice stand," Elara replied. "Your son has had 15 years to seek redemption. Instead, he sent you to hunt me like an animal, to burn my home, to poison innocent children." She stepped back, placing herself beside Kael. "This audience is over, Lord Varen. Return to your territory and prepare your son for the death he has earned." Varen's dark eyes blazed with fury. For a moment, Elara thought he might order his wolves to attack despite the flag of truce. Then his expression shifted, becoming cold and calculating once more. "You have 3 days," he said quietly. 3 days to reconsider. After that, I will come for her with every warrior at my command, and I will not be asking." He mounted his horse, his delegation falling in behind him. "Consider carefully, Alpha King," he called over his shoulder. "Is one woman worth the lives of your pack?" Then he was gone, disappearing into the forest with his 50 wolves, leaving behind a silence that felt like the calm before a devastating storm. Kael turned to Elara, his expression grim. "He will attack," he said. 3 days from now, possibly sooner." "I know." Elara's voice was steady, but inside she felt the weight of what was coming. "I should leave, draw him away from your territory." "No." The word was absolute, brooking no argument. "You are not bait to be dangled before him," Kael continued. "You are not a sacrifice to be made for the greater good. You are my mate, whether or not you accept that bond, and I protect what is mine." Elara opened her mouth to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. "This is not negotiable," he said. "We face Varen together. We fight him together. And when this is over, you and I will have a conversation about the future that does not involve you running away. Despite everything, despite the fear and the anger and the weight of what was coming, Elara felt something warm bloom in her chest. "You are impossibly stubborn," she said. "I learned it from watching you." A ghost of a smile crossed Kael's face. "Now come, we have a war to prepare for." The 3 days that followed were a blur of activity. Kael called in every warrior from every settlement in the territory, swelling the ranks of his defenders to nearly 300. Theron, despite his artificial leg, took command of the tactical preparations, positioning scouts and establishing fallback positions with the precision of a master strategist. Elara worked alongside Maren in the healing center, preparing medicines and training additional healers for the casualties that would inevitably come. She taught them the recipes she had developed over 15 years of isolation, sharing knowledge that had never before left her cabin by the river. At night, she found herself drawn to the training grounds, watching as Kael led his warriors through drills and formations. He moved differently on the battlefield than he did in council chambers. More fluid, more certain. This was where he belonged, she realized, not in meetings with politicians, but in the field, leading wolves who would follow him into death itself. On the second night, he caught her watching from the shadows. "You should be resting," he said, approaching her with a slight limp that told her his old injuries were bothering him. "So should you." Kael's smile was tired, but genuine. An alpha does not rest when his pack is threatened, nor does a healer. She studied his face, the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "When did you last sleep? I could ask you the same question." They stood in silence for a moment, the mate bond humming between them with increasing insistence. Elara had spent 3 days fighting its pull, keeping herself busy with work and preparation. But in the quiet of the night, with war approaching, the bond was harder to ignore. "I have been thinking," Kael said slowly, "about what you said, about connections becoming chains, about protection becoming captivity." He turned to face her fully. "My first marriage was arranged," he continued, "a political alliance between the Northern and Western territories. Lyra was a good woman, kind, dutiful, but we never loved each other. We were partners in leadership, nothing more." He paused, his eyes growing distant with memory. "When she died giving birth to Asher, I grieved for my son's sake more than my own, and I swore I would never enter into another loveless bond, that if I ever found my true mate, I would do whatever was necessary to earn her trust. Not demand it. Earn it." His gaze returned to Elara, intense and searching. "I understand why you fear captivity. I understand why trust does not come easily. But I need you to know that I would rather die tomorrow than see you become a prisoner again. To anyone, including me." Elara felt the walls around her heart tremble. This was not what she had expected, not demands or claims or the Alpha King's authority asserting itself, just honesty, vulnerability, an offering of understanding without conditions. "Why?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why do you care so much? Because my son spoke for the first time in 2 years when you saved him. Because 15 children are alive today because of your knowledge. Because every time I look at you, I see strength that has been forged in fire." Kael took a step closer. "And because the mate bond is not just about desire, Elara, it is about recognition. The moon goddess chose you for me because she knew I needed someone who would not be overwhelmed by what I am, who would challenge me, not just obey me." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face just as it had the night before. "May I?" Elara hesitated. The mate bond screamed at her to accept, to lean into his touch, to finally complete the connection that had been building since the moment their eyes met in the hunter's shelter. But it was not the bond that made her decision. It was the respect in his eyes, the way he waited for her permission, the fact that he had asked instead of taken. She nodded. His palm cupped her cheek, warm and rough with calluses earned through years of battle. The mate bond flared between them, not with the painful intensity she had feared, but with a gentle warmth that spread through her chest like sunlight after a long winter. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Kael said softly, "know that you are not alone anymore, not unless you choose to be." Before she could respond, the howl of a wolf shattered the night. Not a patrol signal, not a hunting cry, an alarm. Kael's expression shifted instantly, the tender moment evaporating as the Alpha King took over. He shifted into his wolf form, his massive white body exploding from human flesh in a heartbeat, and took off toward the source of the sound. Elara ran after him, her human legs no match for his wolf's speed, but driven by the sudden surge of dread in her chest. Something had happened, something terrible. She found them in the council chamber, Theron, his artificial leg clicking against the stone floor as he paced. Caden, his usually impassive face twisted with fury. And on the floor, bound and bloodied, Counselor Draven. The old wolf's face was swollen with fresh bruises, his gray robes torn and dirty, but his dark eyes still burned with defiance. "He was trying to escape," Theron reported as Kael shifted back to human form. "My scouts caught him at the eastern border, heading toward Varen's territory." "With what?" Kael's voice was ice. "Maps." Theron's expression darkened. Detailed maps of every defensive position, every supply cache, every fallback point. If Varen had gotten his hands on these, he would know exactly how to break through our lines. Kael turned to face Draven, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. "Explain." Draven laughed, a harsh and bitter sound. "Explain? You want me to explain?" He struggled to his knees, his bound hands shaking with age and fury. "I have served this pack for 40 years. I watched your father build it from nothing, and then you took the throne, and everything he worked for began to crumble." He spat on the floor. "A mate bond with a pain-bearer, a broken alliance with the Southern Pack, now a war with the Eastern Territory. You are destroying us, Kale, and someone had to stop you. So you poisoned children." Kale's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made Elara's chest tighten. "You put wolfsbane in their water supply, a necessary sacrifice." Draven showed no remorse, to prove that the pain-bearer brought only suffering, to turn the pack against her before you could destroy everything. "And the maps? You would have handed our defensive positions to an enemy alpha?" "Varen promised me support." Draven's chin lifted defiantly. "When you fell, when your failed leadership brought us to ruin, he would help me take control, put the Northern Territory back on the path your father intended." The chamber fell silent. Elara watched as Kyle processed this betrayal, watched the play of emotions across his scarred face, anger, disgust, and beneath it all, a grief that spoke of shattered trust. "Is there anything else?" Kyle asked finally. "Any other conspirators, any other traitors waiting to strike?" Draven's smile turned ugly. "Only one more thing," he said. "Something Varen asked me to tell you when I was captured, since he knew I might not escape." He looked directly at Elara, his dark eyes glittering with malice. "Princess Isolde of the Southern Pack is riding north as we speak, 200 warriors at her back. She intends to hold you to your marriage promise, Alpha King, and she will not accept refusal." Elara felt the blood drain from her face. A second army approaching, a political crisis on top of a military one. Kyle's expression did not change, but she could feel the tension radiating through the mate bond. "Isolde's father and I had an understanding," he said slowly. "The marriage was contingent on no true mate emerging before the ceremony. That condition has been met." "Has it?" Draven's smile widened. "Have you completed the mate bond? Marked her as yours before the moon goddess?" "No, you have not, which means Isolde's claim still stands." He laughed again, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "Two armies, Alpha King, one from the east demanding the pain-bearer, one from the south demanding you, and a pack full of wolves who are beginning to wonder if their leader has lost his mind." He slumped back against the floor, his work done. "I may die for my treason," he said quietly, "but I die knowing that I have saved my pack from your foolishness." The silence that followed stretched like a blade. Then Kale spoke, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Counselor Draven, for the crimes of poisoning children, conspiring with enemy forces, and betraying the pack you swore to serve, you are sentenced to execution at dawn. Take him to the cells." Caden moved forward, lifting the bound traitor as easily as a child might lift a doll. Draven did not struggle, did not protest. He simply smiled as he was carried from the chamber, secure in the knowledge that he had planted seeds of chaos that would bloom long after his death. When they were gone, Kale turned to Elara. "I apologize," he said quietly. "I had hoped to have more time before we faced this complication." "Princess Isolde," Elara's voice was steady despite the churning in her stomach. "Your promised bride, a promise made by my father when I was too young to have a say." Kael's jaw tightened. "I have met Isolde twice. She is ambitious, calculating, and utterly uninterested in anything beyond the power our union would bring. But the alliance with the Southern Pack depends on it. It did." Kael's eyes met hers. "Now it depends on something else entirely." He moved to the window, staring out at the darkness beyond. "Varen will attack from the east in less than a day. Isolde will arrive from the south within hours of that. I cannot fight a war on two fronts." He turned back to face her. "But perhaps I do not have to fight them at all." Elara frowned. "What do you mean?" "Isolde does not want me," Kale said slowly. "She wants an alliance that will protect her pack from the Western territories. She wants trade agreements and military support. The marriage was simply the traditional way to secure those things." He looked at Elara with an expression she could not quite read. "What if we offered her something better? something that does not require her to tie herself to a man whose heart belongs to another. You want to negotiate with her. I want you to negotiate with her. Kael's voice was quiet but intense. Woman to woman, as equals, you understand what it means to be used as a political pawn. You know the weight of being offered as a prize to be won. He crossed the room to stand before her. Isolde is practical above all else. If you can offer her what she actually needs without demanding that she sacrifice her freedom in exchange, she may be willing to withdraw her claim. Elara stared at him. This was not what she had expected, not a command or a demand, but a request, an acknowledgement that she had skills beyond healing, perspectives beyond suffering. You would trust me to negotiate the future of your alliance? I would trust you with far more than that, Kael said simply, but this is a start. Elara thought about what she knew of political maneuvering, of the careful dance of power and compromise that kept territories from tearing each other apart. She thought about the years she had spent studying, reading, learning everything she could get her hands on during her isolation. And she thought about what it would mean to be more than just a pain-bearer, more than just a healer, more than just a victim of circumstance. I will need information, she said finally. Everything you know about Isolde, her strengths, her weaknesses, what the Southern Pack truly needs. Kael's expression softened with something that looked like hope. You will have it, he promised, and I will have your back, whatever happens. The mate bond pulsed between them, warm and steady. For the first time since she had pulled a drowning pup from the river, Elara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth staying for. Now she just had to survive the next 3 days to claim it. The War Council assembled before dawn on the third day. Kael stood at the head of the table, maps spread before him, his scarred face illuminated by torchlight that cast dancing shadows across the stone walls. Around him gathered the wolves who would determine the fate of the Northern Territory. Theron sat at his right hand, the beta's artificial leg propped against the table as he studied the defensive positions with tactical precision. Caden stood at the door, his massive form blocking any unwanted entry. Marin occupied a chair near the fireplace, her gray eyes sharp despite the early hour, and Elara sat across from Kael, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. 300 warriors, Theron reported, his voice grim. That is every able-bodied wolf we could muster on short notice. Varen brings 500 according to our scouts. Isolde approaches with 200 more. 700 against 300. Caden's deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Even with our defensive positions, those odds are not survivable. We will not fight both armies. Kael's eyes met Elara's across the table. We have a plan. The room fell silent, every wolf waiting for their alpha king to explain. But Kael simply nodded toward Elara. Tell them. Elara rose from her chair, her silver-white hair catching the torchlight as she moved to stand beside the maps. She could feel the skepticism radiating from some of the wolves present. She was an outsider, a stranger who had appeared from nowhere and brought chaos to their doorstep. Why should they listen to her? But Kael had given her the floor, and she would not waste the opportunity. Princess Isolde does not want war with the Northern Territory, Elara began, her voice steady and clear. She wants security for her pack, protection from the Western Territories, who have been encroaching on southern lands for the past decade, trade agreements that will keep her people fed during the harsh winters. She pointed to the southern border on the map. The marriage arrangement was her father's solution to these problems, a political alliance sealed by blood. But Isolde herself has shown no enthusiasm for the match. My sources indicate she has delayed the wedding 3 times already, finding excuses to postpone what she sees as a sacrifice of her own freedom. What sources? One of the wolves demanded. You have been here less than a week. I have spent 15 years studying, Elara replied calmly. Reading every text I could find on territorial politics, pack dynamics, and the history of alliances between the great territories. I may not have spies in Isolde's court, but I understand how ambitious women think, because I am one. She turned back to the map. If we offer Isolde what she actually needs without demanding that she give up her autonomy in exchange, she may be willing to withdraw her claim on the Alpha King, a trade agreement, a mutual defense pact, access to our healing knowledge, which is far superior to what the Southern Pact currently possesses. And if she refuses? Theron asked. Then we fight on two fronts and likely die. Elara's voice was matter-of-fact. But I do not believe she will refuse. Isolde is practical above all else. She will choose the option that benefits her pack most, and that option is not a war she might lose against a kingdom that could otherwise be her ally. Kael stood, drawing every eye in the room. Elara will meet with Isolde before the princess's army reaches our borders, he announced. She will negotiate on behalf of the Northern Territory with my full authority behind her words. The council erupted in protest. Voices rose over each other, wolves demanding to know why an outsider should be trusted with such responsibility, why the Alpha King was placing their fate in the hands of a woman they barely knew. Kael let them argue for exactly 30 seconds. Then he spoke a single word. Enough. The command cut through the chaos like a blade. Silence fell instantly, every wolf remembering exactly who ruled this territory. This is not a debate, Kael continued, his voice cold. Elara has proven her worth a dozen times over since arriving here. She saved my son. She cured 15 children of a poison that would have killed them. She has shown more loyalty to this pack in 1 week than Counselor Draven showed in 40 years. His ice-blue eyes swept the room. If any of you doubt my judgment, you are welcome to challenge me for leadership. Otherwise, you will follow my commands without question. Is that understood? No one spoke. No one moved. Good. Kael turned to Elara. You leave within the hour. Take Caden and 4 guards as escort. I will remain here to prepare our defenses against Varen. The mate bond pulsed between them, warm with something that felt like pride and fear in equal measure. Elara nodded once. I will not fail you, she said quietly. I know. The meeting with Princess Isolde took place at midday in a clearing near the southern border where ancient oaks formed a natural amphitheater. Elara arrived first, dismounting from her horse with a calm she did not entirely feel. She had dressed carefully for this encounter, choosing a simple gown of deep blue that contrasted with her silver hair. No jewelry, no ostentatious displays of wealth. She wanted Isolde to see her as an equal, not as a rival trying to outshine her. Caden and the 4 guards positioned themselves at the edge of the clearing, visible but not intrusive. Their presence was a reminder of the Northern Territory's strength without being an overt threat. Elara waited. She did not have to wait long. The southern delegation emerged from the forest exactly on schedule, 200 warriors in tight formation behind a single figure on a white horse. Princess Isolde rode at their head like a queen already crowned, her auburn hair flowing in a breeze that seemed to exist just for her. She was beautiful. Elara had expected that. What she had not expected was the intelligence burning in those green eyes, the way Isolde assessed her in a single sweeping glance that missed nothing. The princess dismounted gracefully, approaching Elara with measured steps that spoke of years of diplomatic training. So, Isolde's voice was cool but not hostile. You are the pain-bearer who has stolen my betrothed. I have stolen nothing, Elara replied evenly. The Alpha King and I share a mate bond, placed upon us by the moon goddess herself. Neither of us chose it, and yet you benefit from it. Isolde circled her slowly, like a predator evaluating prey. A nobody from nowhere, suddenly elevated to the position of Luna. Quite the improvement in circumstances. Elara let the insult pass without reaction. I did not come here to discuss my circumstances, Princess. I came to discuss yours. Isolde stopped circling, one elegant eyebrow arching upward. Oh, and what could you possibly know about my circumstances? I know that your father arranged your marriage to Kael when you were 16 years old, Elara said calmly. I know that you have postponed the wedding 3 times, citing illness, territorial emergencies, and once simply bad weather. She met Isolde's green eyes directly. I know that the Western Territories have claimed 2 of your border settlements in the past 5 years, and that your pack's food stores were nearly depleted last winter. I know that you are intelligent, ambitious, and utterly uninterested in becoming any man's prize." Isolde's expression flickered, surprise breaking through her carefully maintained composure. "You have done your research. I have had 15 years with little to do but read." Elara allowed herself a small smile. "And I recognize ambition when I see it, because I share it." Isolde was silent for a long moment, her green eyes calculating. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "I want you to withdraw your claim on the Alpha King," Elara said. "In exchange, I offer the following: a trade agreement guaranteeing your pack access to northern agricultural surplus at cost, a mutual defense pact requiring northern warriors to answer any attack on southern territory, and full access to my healing knowledge, including treatments for winter sickness and food preservation techniques that will ensure your people never go hungry again." Isolde's eyes widened fractionally. "That is generous. It is practical." Elara's voice was firm. "A marriage alliance would give you one man's loyalty. What I offer gives you an entire territory's commitment, and it leaves you free to marry whomever you choose, or no one at all." The silence stretched between them. Elara could see Isolde's mind working, weighing the costs and benefits with the precision of a trained politician. "The Alpha King agreed to these terms? He gave me full authority to negotiate on his behalf. And what do you gain from this arrangement?" Isolde's voice carried a note of suspicion. "Beyond the obvious, I mean. I gain a pack that is not fighting a war on 2 fronts." Elara's voice was honest. "I gain a chance to prove my value beyond my bloodline. And I gain an ally who understands what it means to be treated as a commodity rather than a person." Something shifted in Isolde's expression. The cold calculation gave way to something almost like respect. "You are not what I expected," she said slowly. "Neither are you." Elara extended her hand. "Do we have an agreement, Princess?" For a long moment, Isolde simply stared at the offered hand. Then slowly, she reached out and clasped it. "We have an agreement," she said. "But I have one condition. Name it. When this is over, when Varen has been dealt with, I want to visit your territory. I want to see for myself whether the Northern Pack is truly as different as you claim." Elara nodded. "You will be welcome as an honored guest." Isolde's grip tightened briefly before releasing. "Then I wish you luck against the Eastern Wolves," she said. "I will withdraw my forces to observe. If you prevail, I will return to formalize our agreement. If you fall—" She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. "If we fall, you will have lost nothing," Elara finished, "and gained information about Varen's strength for your own future conflicts." Isolde smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. "Perhaps you understand politics better than I gave you credit for." She turned back toward her horse, pausing before mounting. "One more thing," she called over her shoulder. "The Alpha King is fortunate to have found you. Tell him I said so." Then she was gone, her army retreating south with the smooth efficiency of well-trained warriors. Elara allowed herself exactly 5 seconds to breathe before mounting her own horse, one front down, one to go. The battle began at sunset. Elara arrived back at the Northern Territory to find chaos already unfolding. Varen had attacked early, his 500 warriors flooding through the eastern forest with the ferocity of wolves who knew they were fighting for their alpha's dying son. Kale met her at the gates, his white fur already stained with blood that was not his own. "Isolde?" he demanded, shifting to human form mid-stride. "Withdrawn. She agreed to our terms." Relief flashed across his face, but there was no time for celebration. "Then we have a fighting chance." He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the healing center. "Varen is pressing hard on our eastern line. Theron is holding, but he cannot last forever. I should be out there." "No." Kale's voice brooked no argument. "You should be here, preparing for the wounded who will come. That is where you are needed most." He was right, and Elara knew it. Her gift, her knowledge, her skills. Those were her weapons, not claws or teeth. She ran to the healing center, finding Marin already organizing the young healers into teams. Tables had been set up in rows, bandages and medicines laid out in neat piles. The smell of herbs and antiseptic filled the air. "How many?" Elara asked, tying her hair back. "Unknown." Marin's face was grim. "But it will be many before this night is over." The first wave of wounded arrived within the hour. They came in carried by their packmates, wolves with torn flesh and broken bones, and injuries that would have killed lesser creatures. Elara moved among them like a force of nature, directing healers, administering treatments, making split-second decisions about who could be saved and who was beyond help. She did not use her gift. Not yet. Every wound she treated came from her knowledge alone, from the 15 years of study that had taught her the secrets of the body and the medicines that could repair it. But as the hours passed and the wounded kept coming, she felt her energy flagging. There were too many wolves bleeding out on her tables, too many desperate faces looking to her for salvation. Then they brought in Theron. The Beta had been leading the defense of the eastern line when a group of eastern wolves had flanked his position. He had fought off 7 of them before going down, his artificial leg shattered, and his body riddled with wounds that leaked dark blood onto the stretcher. Elara was at his side in an instant. "Report," she commanded, her hands already assessing the damage. Theron's gray eyes found hers, pain and determination warring in their depths. "Line is holding," he gasped. Cale pushed them back. "But Varen is not stopping. He is throwing everything at us. Stop talking." Elara's voice was sharp with worry. "Save your strength." But even as she worked, she could see the truth. Theron's wounds were too severe. He had lost too much blood, sustained too much internal damage. Her medicines could ease his pain, but they could not save his life. She had only one option. "Everyone out," she ordered. "Now." The healers hesitated, confused by the sudden command, but something in Elara's voice brooked no argument. They fled the room, leaving her alone with the dying Beta. Theron's eyes met hers, understanding dawning. "Your gift," he whispered. "I swore I would never use it again." Elara's hands trembled as she placed them on his chest. "I swore I would not take that risk." "Then do not." Theron's voice was weak, but firm. "I have lived a good life. Do not sacrifice yourself. For me." But Elara was not listening. She was thinking about Kael, who had shown her what true leadership looked like. About Asher, who had called her mama with a child's pure trust. About the pack that had welcomed her despite their suspicions, that had given her a chance to prove herself. Theron was part of that pack. He was Kael's closest friend, his brother in all but blood. If Elara let him die, something in Kael would die with him. The mate bond pulsed in her chest, warm and insistent. And suddenly she understood what Marin had been trying to tell her. The bond was not just connection, it was protection. A filtering of the gift so that healing could occur without the backlash of absorbed suffering, but only if she accepted it fully, only if she stopped fighting the bond and let it become what it was meant to be. Elara closed her eyes and surrendered. The power flowed through her like a river breaking free of a dam. She felt Theron's pain, his injuries, the death that was creeping through his body. She reached for it, prepared to draw it into herself the way she had always done. But instead of flooding into her, the suffering met resistance. The mate bond flared between her and Kael, wherever he was on the battlefield, and suddenly she felt warmth surrounding her. Protection. Love. The darkness could not touch her. Elara opened her eyes to find healing energy pouring from her hands into Theron's broken body. She watched as wounds closed, as bones knitted, as the color returned to the Beta's pale face. She felt none of it. No pain, no backlash. Nothing but the gentle warmth of power flowing through her without cost. Theron gasped, his back arching off the table as life flooded back into him. His gray eyes shot open, clear and sharp. "What? What did you do?" "I healed you." Elara's voice was filled with wonder. "And I felt nothing. The implications crashed over her in waves. The legends were true. The mate bond could protect a pain-bearer from the cost of her gift. All these years of hiding, of fearing, of believing she was cursed, and the answer had been so simple. Love, trust, acceptance. You need to rejoin the battle, she said, helping Theron sit up. Kale needs you. My leg. Theron looked down at the shattered remnants of his artificial limb. Elara glanced around the healing center, her mind racing. Her eyes landed on a wooden beam that had fallen during an earlier commotion. "Give me 60 seconds," she said. What followed was not elegant, but it was effective. Elara fashioned a crude replacement from the beam and spare leather straps, something that would hold long enough for Theron to reach the battle. The beta stood, testing the makeshift leg with a warrior's pragmatism. "It will do," he said. And then, softer, "Thank you." "Thank me by keeping him alive," Elara replied. "Now go." Theron shifted into his wolf form and was gone, his silver body disappearing into the night. Elara turned back to the remaining wounded, but her mind was elsewhere. The mate bond hummed in her chest, connecting her to Kale across the distance. She could feel his exhaustion, his determination, his fear for his pack. And she could feel something else, something dark approaching from the east, carried by a presence that made her blood run cold. Varen was coming, and he was bringing something terrible with him. The battle shifted an hour before dawn. Elara felt it through the mate bond, a sudden surge of danger that made her drop the bandage she was holding. Kyle was in trouble. Not injured, not yet, but facing something that terrified him in a way that combat alone could not. She ran. The eastern battlefield was a nightmare of blood and bodies, wolves from both packs tangled together in the chaos of close combat. The smell of death hung thick in the air, mixing with the copper tang of spilled blood and the sulphurous stench of something else. Something wrong. Elara found Kale at the center of the carnage, his white fur red with the blood of enemies he had slain. But he was not fighting. He was standing frozen, staring at the figure that had emerged from the Eastern Pack's ranks. Lord Varen walked across the battlefield as if the violence around him was merely an inconvenience. His dark eyes burned with a light that was not quite sane, and in his arms he carried a body. Soren, Varen's son, the man whose torture had killed Elara's mother. But the Soren she remembered from her nightmares was nothing like the creature Varen held. The shadow sickness had consumed him almost entirely, leaving behind a husk of what had once been a young man. His skin was gray and translucent, dark veins visible beneath like cracks in old porcelain. His eyes were open but saw nothing, empty windows into a soul that was being eaten alive. "This is what you condemn my son to," Varen called out, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "This is the death you would give him, pain-bearer. Look at him. Look at what your refusal has done." Elara walked forward, past the fighting wolves, past the blood and the bodies, until she stood before Varen with nothing between them but empty air. "Your son did this to himself," she said, her voice steady despite the horror before her. "The shadow sickness is not a disease. It is a curse, placed upon those who torture pain-bearers. He brought this upon himself when he tortured my mother to death." Varen's face twisted with grief and rage. He was young. He did not understand. He understood enough to enjoy it. 15 years of nightmares gave Elara's voice an edge of steel. I heard him laughing while she screamed. I saw the pleasure in his eyes when she begged for mercy. Do not tell me he did not understand. For a long moment, Varen simply stared at her. Then, slowly, the fight went out of him. "I know," he whispered. "I know what he did. I have known from the beginning." He looked down at his dying son, and Elara saw the truth in his eyes. Not denial, not justification, just the terrible grief of a father who loved a monster. "But he is still my son," Varen continued, his voice breaking. "I cannot watch him die. Not like this. Then you should have raised him better." The voice came from behind Varen, and every wolf on the battlefield froze. Soren stood on his own feet, having somehow slipped from his father's grasp without anyone noticing. The shadow sickness still consumed him, dark veins pulsing beneath his gray skin, but his eyes were clear, lucid, filled with something that looked almost like peace. "Father." Soren's voice was a rasp, barely audible. "Stop this, Soren." Varen turned to his son, hope and horror warring on his face. "You should not be standing. You should not be. I should not be many things." Soren swayed but remained upright through sheer force of will. "I should not have hurt that woman. Should not have enjoyed her screams. Should not have spent 15 years pretending that what I did was justified." He turned to face Elara, and she saw tears streaming down his gray cheeks. "I remember you," he said. "You were 17. You tried to fight us when we took your mother. One of the guards hit you so hard you lost consciousness." Elara said nothing. The memory was a wound that had never fully healed. "I have relived that day every moment since the shadow took me." Soren's voice cracked. "I feel what she felt, the pain, the fear, the desperation to save you, even as I was killing her." He fell to his knees, too weak to stand any longer. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I know I do not deserve it. But I am asking you to let me do one thing right before I die." He looked back at his father. "End this war. Withdraw the troops. Let these wolves go home to their families." "Soren." Varen's voice was anguished. "I cannot lose you. You lost me 15 years ago, Father." Soren's smile was sad but genuine. "The day I became a monster. The shadow is just making it official." He turned back to Elara. "Kill me," he said. "Use your gift to absorb the shadow and end my suffering." Elara felt the request like a physical blow. "You want me to die for you?" she said flatly. "After what you did to my mother?" "No." Soren shook his head. "I want you to release me. The shadow is killing me already. I have days, maybe hours. I'm not asking you to save me. I am asking you to end it quickly, so my father will have no more reason to fight." Elara stared at him, her mind racing. She could feel the shadow sickness radiating from Soren, a darkness that made her gift recoil. If she tried to absorb it, even with the mate bond's protection, she did not know what would happen. The shadow was not pain or injury. It was something older, something born from the moon goddess's justice. But Soren was not asking her to save him. He was asking for mercy. And mercy was something Elara could give. She walked forward, ignoring Varen's cry of protest, ignoring the wolves who moved to intercept her. Kael appeared at her side, his white fur pressed against her leg, and she drew strength from his presence. "I will not absorb the shadow," she said quietly, kneeling before Soren. "But I will ease your passing. That is all I can offer." Soren closed his eyes. "It is more than I deserve." Elara placed her hands on his chest and let her gift flow. She did not try to heal him, did not try to remove the shadow that consumed him. Instead, she reached for the pain, the fear, the torment that had been his constant companion since the curse took hold. The mate bond flared, protecting her from the worst of what she touched. But she still felt echoes of Soren's suffering. 15 years of agony, of reliving his crimes over and over, of feeling what his victims had felt. And beneath all that darkness, she found something unexpected. Remorse. Genuine, soul-deep remorse that had been growing for years, buried beneath the shadow's torment. Soren had been a monster, but somewhere along the way, he had begun to understand exactly what kind of monster he was. "I see her." Soren's whisper was barely audible. "Your mother. She is waiting for me." Elara's hands trembled, but she did not stop. "She is not angry," Soren continued. She is sad. Sad that I wasted my life. Sad that I caused so much pain." Tears streamed down his face. Tell her I understand now. Tell her I am sorry." His breathing slowed. The darkness pulsed once, twice, and then began to fade. And as Soren's life slipped away, Elara saw something impossible. A vision, flooding through the connection between her gift and his dying mind. Her mother, Miriam, standing in a field of white flowers. Not as she had been at the end, broken and hollow, but as she had been before. Strong, beautiful, filled with love. The vision shifted, and Elara saw what had really happened 15 years ago. Miriam had known she was dying, had known that no matter what she did, the Eastern Pack would kill her eventually. But she had also known about the shadow sickness, the curse that befell those who tortured pain-bearers. And she had made a choice. Instead of fighting, instead of trying to survive, Miriam had poured everything she had into ensuring the curse would take root. She had suffered willingly, deliberately, knowing that her pain would become Soren's punishment. But more than that, she had seen the future. Not clearly, not in detail, but enough. She had seen Elara finding her mate, had seen the protection the bond would provide, had known that her daughter would be safe, would be loved, would be free. Miriam had not died in despair. She had died in hope. The vision faded, and Elara found herself kneeling on the blood-soaked ground with Soren's body cooling beneath her hands. The shadow was gone, dissolved with its host, and the battlefield had gone utterly silent. Varen knelt beside his son's corpse, grief etched into every line of his face. But when he looked up at Elara, there was no anger in his eyes, only exhaustion. "It is over," he said hollowly. "We are done." He rose slowly, turning to face the Eastern warriors who still stood in battle formation. "Lay down your arms," he commanded. "The war is finished. My son is at peace." Elara watched as the Eastern wolves obeyed, watched as weapons fell to the ground and heads bowed in surrender. She should have felt triumphant, should have felt satisfied that justice had finally been served. Instead, she just felt tired. Kale shifted beside her, his human form appearing with blood still streaking his silver hair. His ice-blue eyes searched her face with concern. "Are you all right?" Elara considered the question. "I saw my mother," she said finally. "In Soren's last moments, she showed me the truth about how she died." Kale waited, saying nothing. She chose it. Elara's voice was filled with wonder. She knew the curse would take him, knew it would protect me someday. She died believing I would find my way to safety. She looked at Kale, at the mate bond humming between them, at the pack that surrounded them with loyal faces and bloodied fur. And she was right. Kale pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady, matching the rhythm of her own. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "You are safe. We are safe." For the first time in 15 years, Elara let herself believe it. The aftermath of battle was almost worse than the battle itself. The dead had to be counted, the wounded tended, the prisoners secured. Elara worked through the night and into the next day, her gift flowing freely as she healed wolf after wolf without any of the pain that had haunted her for so long. The mate bond hummed in her chest, a constant reminder that she was no longer alone. Varen surrendered himself to northern justice, too broken by grief to care about his own fate. Kael imprisoned him comfortably but securely, waiting for the day when the territory's council would decide what to do with the Alpha who had started a war for love of his son. The Eastern Pack itself dissolved in the wake of Varen's defeat. Many of its members, wolves who had never wanted war in the first place, petitioned to join the Northern Territory. Kael accepted them with conditions. They would be watched, evaluated, given time to prove their loyalty. Theron resumed his duties as Beta within a week, walking on a new artificial leg that Elara had designed and built herself. It was better than his old one, lighter and more flexible, crafted with the same obsessive attention to detail that she brought to her healing. "I cannot believe you made this." Theron tested the leg's range of motion, his gray eyes filled with wonder. "I have worn artificial limbs for 20 years. None of them have felt this natural. I had good materials to work with." Elara smiled, and a very patient subject. Theron clasped her hand, his grip firm and warm. "You saved my life," he said simply. "I will not forget that. Just try not to need saving again." Elara's voice was light. "I have enough work without patching you up every other day." Theron laughed, and the sound echoed through the healing center like music. 2 months passed before Kael asked her to take a walk with him. The sun was setting as they left the central settlement, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. They walked in comfortable silence, following a path that wound through ancient forest toward the river that had once been Elara's home. "I never thanked you properly," Kale said finally, "for negotiating with Isolde, for healing my wolves, for everything you have done since arriving here. You have thanked me many times." "With words." Kael stopped walking, turning to face her. "But words are not enough for what you have given me." He took her hands in his ice-blue eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You saved my son. You gave him back his voice, his joy, his will to live. You saved my beta, my pack, my territory. You showed me what it means to be truly connected to another person, not through politics or obligation, but through choice." His grip tightened. "I love you, Elara. Not because of the mate bond, though that is part of it. I love you because of who you are, your strength, your wisdom, your determination to help others, even when it costs you everything." Elara felt tears prick at her eyes. "I do not deserve this," she whispered. "I spent 15 years running, hiding, afraid of my own gift. I am not the hero you think I am." "No." Kael's voice was soft but firm. "You are something better. You are a survivor who chose to stop surviving and start living. A healer who found a way to heal without suffering. A woman who faced down 2 armies with nothing but her intelligence and her courage." He released her hands, reaching into his coat pocket. "I am not asking because the mate bond demands it," he continued. "I am not asking because it would be politically advantageous. I am asking because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." He withdrew a ring, simple and elegant, a silver band set with a pale blue stone that matched her eyes. "Marry me, Elara. Not as a duty, not as an obligation, as a choice." "Your choice." Elara stared at the ring, her vision blurring with tears. She thought about everything she had been through, the torture, the isolation, the years of loneliness and fear. She thought about Asher's small hand clasping hers, about Theron's gruff gratitude, about the pack that had become her family, and she thought about her mother, who had died believing that this moment would come. "Yes." The word came out as a whisper. "Yes, I will marry you." Kael's face broke into a smile that transformed his scarred features into something beautiful. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that made the mate bond sing with pure, uncomplicated joy. When they finally broke apart, the sun had fully set and stars were appearing overhead. "We should probably tell Asher," Kael murmured. "He has been asking every day when you are going to officially become his mother." Elara laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her. "Then we should not keep him waiting." They walked back to the territory hand in hand, and for the first time in her life, Elara felt truly home. The mating ceremony took place under the full moon 1 month later. The entire pack had gathered to witness, wolves in both human and animal forms filling the ceremonial grounds with a sea of faces. Torches lined the central clearing, their flames dancing in a breeze that carried the scent of autumn flowers. Elara stood at the altar, dressed in a gown of silver and white that made her look like moonlight given form. Her hair flowed loose over her shoulders, crowned with a circlet of woven wildflowers that Asher had made himself. The boy stood beside her, now 5 years old and talking up a storm. He had insisted on holding her hand throughout the ceremony, his small fingers gripping hers with fierce possessiveness. "This is my mama now," he had announced to everyone who would listen. "My real mama, forever and ever." Kael approached the altar with Theron at his right hand and Caden at his left. The Alpha King was dressed in formal attire for once, the dark fabric making his silver hair seem brighter and his ice-blue eyes more intense. When their eyes met, the mate bond flared between them, and Elara felt the last of her walls crumble. Marin performed the ceremony, her voice carrying the ancient words with reverence and warmth. She spoke of the moon goddess and her blessings, of the bonds that tied wolves together, of the responsibilities of Luna and Alpha. But Elara barely heard the words. She was too focused on Kael, on the love shining in his eyes, on the future they would build together. When the time came for the marking, Kael took her face in his hands with infinite gentleness. "I love your kindness," he said softly. "Your strength, your willingness to sacrifice yourself for others. I love that you saved my son. I love that you are healing my pack, not just with your gift, but with your presence." He leaned forward until his forehead touched hers. "And I promise to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how precious you are." Elara felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "I love you," she replied. "I love your dedication to your people, your devotion to Asher, your patience with me. I love that you gave me a choice, that you waited for me to be ready. And I promise to stand beside you, to be the Luna your pack needs, to raise our children with all the love they deserve." Kale kissed her then, deep and thorough, and the mate bond exploded between them in a wave of golden light that made the entire pack gasp. When he marked her neck, claiming her as his before the moon goddess and all witnesses, Elara felt her gift transform. Instead of pain, instead of absorbing the bite, she channeled healing energy back into him, strengthening, blessing, tying them together in a way that went beyond flesh and blood. The pack erupted in celebration. Howls echoed through the territory, a sound of joy and acceptance that Elara felt in her soul. Asher was jumping up and down, cheering until Elara scooped him up and he buried his face against her neck with a happy sound. "My mama," he mumbled. "Mine. Yours," Elara confirmed, pressing a kiss to his silver hair. "Always yours." 5 years later, Elara sat in the gardens of the Northern Territory's first healing academy, watching her students practice the techniques she had developed over 2 decades of study. The academy had been her dream, built from the ground up with Kael's full support. Young wolves came from every territory to learn, not just the herbs and medicines that any healer could master, but the deeper secrets of the body and the gift. Because Elara was no longer the last pain-bearer, Aurora sat in her mother's lap, 3 years old with silver hair and her father's ice-blue eyes. She had shown signs of the gift early, her small hands instinctively reaching to soothe any pain she sensed around her. But unlike Elara at that age, Aurora would never suffer for her power. The mate bond extended to her from birth, filtering her gift through the love of her family. Across the garden, Asher practiced combat forms with Theron, now 12 years old and already showing signs of becoming a formidable warrior. He had his father's build and his birth mother's eyes. But his heart was pure Elara, protective, kind, fiercely loyal to those he loved. And in the cradle beside her, little Ash slept peacefully, 6 months old, with silver fur that promised he would shift into a magnificent wolf when the time came. He had inherited his father's strategic mind, already showing signs of the intelligence that would one day make him a leader in his own right. Elara looked at her family, at the pack that had become her home, at the life she had built from the ashes of her past. "You are smiling again." Kael appeared at her side, his silver hair longer now and streaked with the first hints of gray. He moved with the same careful precision she had noticed the day they met, favoring his left shoulder, the old injuries never quite fading. But his eyes still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I am thinking about the river," she said. Kael settled beside her, one arm wrapping around her shoulders. "The river where you saved Asher, the river where everything changed." Elara leaned into his warmth. "I spent 5 years there, hiding from the world, believing I was cursed. And then a storm came, and a child was drowning, and I had to make a choice." She looked down at Aurora, at the gift that flowed through her daughter's veins. "If I had not jumped in, none of this would exist. The pack would have lost its prince. You would have lost your son, and I would have spent the rest of my life alone, never knowing what I was missing." Kael pressed a kiss to her temple. "The moon goddess provides," he murmured. "She knew what you needed before you did." Aurora stirred in Elara's lap, her pale blue eyes blinking open. "Mama," the little girl said, "Ash is having a bad dream." Elara glanced at the cradle, where the baby had indeed begun to fuss. Before she could move, Aurora slipped from her lap and toddled over to her brother. The 3-year-old placed her small hand on Ash's forehead, and Elara felt the healing energy flow between them. The baby's fussing stopped, his face relaxing into peaceful sleep. Aurora looked back at her mother with a proud smile. "I fixed him." Elara's heart swelled with love. "You did, sweetheart. You did." She looked at Kael, at the life they had built, at the future stretching before them. This was what her mother had seen. This was the vision that had given Miriam hope in her darkest moments. Not just survival, but flourishing. Not just escape, but family. "You are thinking about her again." Kael's voice was soft with understanding. "Always." Elara's smile was tinged with bittersweetness, but not with grief anymore, just gratitude. She stood, lifting Aurora into her arms and watching as Asher finally managed to land a hit on Theron that made the beta stagger. "I am going to teach the afternoon class," she told Kael. "Will you watch the little ones?" Kael nodded, already reaching for the cradle. As Elara walked toward the academy building, she passed a young pain-bearer who had arrived just last week. The girl was barely 16, her silver hair still darkening to its final shade, her pale eyes filled with the same fear Elara had carried for so long. Elara stopped, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. "You are not cursed," she said firmly. "You are blessed. Your gift is a tool, a way to help others, a power that makes you special. It is only as heavy as the fear you attach to it." The girl looked up at her with desperate hope. "But the pain. When I heal someone, it hurts so much, because you are alone." Elara squeezed her shoulder. "But you do not have to stay that way. There are people here who will help you, and somewhere your purpose is waiting, your family is waiting, your future is waiting." She smiled, warm and encouraging. "You just have to be brave enough to reach for it." The girl nodded slowly, some of the fear fading from her eyes. Elara watched her go, remembering her own journey. The isolation, the fear, the moment when a drowning pup had changed everything. She had been brave enough to jump into that river, brave enough to trust a mate she had every reason to fear, brave enough to love again after so many years alone. And now, standing in the garden of the life she had built, surrounded by family and pack and purpose, she knew it had all been worth it. The river had not been her grave, it had been her beginning, and the story it started would continue for generations to come.